My name is Erin Calloway, and the moment everything shifted was when Julian Marks smirked across his walnut desk and said, "Good luck getting hired again at your age, especially in artificial intelligence." He chuckled so hard, the ceramic mug in his hand clinked against his laptop. That was his response to my resignation letter. I was 42. He was 55. And I had just handed in my notice after 12 years of building his reputation from behind the scenes. 12 years writing advanced predictive learning models, optimization frameworks, and self-healing systems that had reshaped logistics, health tech, and smart infrastructure. Julian, he was the face, the one with the charm, the suits, the stage presence, the so-called innovator who keynoted international conferences and gave TED-style talks about his revolutionary approaches. But here's what they never saw. I designed every line of those systems, every iteration, every experiment, every breakthrough, mine. Before I go further, pause and drop a comment, telling me where you're listening from. I want to know how far this story travels. And if you're the kind of person who's ever been underestimated, go ahead and like, subscribe, and hit that bell. Because the rest of this story, it's about to turn. There I was, in his San Francisco office, 41 floors above Market Street. He looked me up and down like I was a naive intern, not the architect of the systems that earned him 3 industry awards. "Seriously, Erin," he said, reclining like he owned the world. "You're over 40. In AI, that's basically retirement." I didn't flinch. I just held my moving box. It wasn't full of desk plants or farewell cards. Inside, my backup drives. All of them. Labeled, encrypted, time-stamped. Julian squinted at the box. "What's that? Your snacks and photo frames?" "No," I said evenly. 12 years of version logs, architecture maps, prototypes, and test data. All backed up to my private cloud, as outlined in the IP agreement, section 6.4. The smile dropped. Not panic yet, but the confusion was starting to settle in. He had no clue. Julian never understood the actual systems, just memorized enough buzzwords to fool investors and the press. He couldn't write a recursive function if his life depended on it. For a decade, he wore my work like a tailored suit. But today, I was taking it back. And that was just the beginning. "You can't take proprietary company information," Julian said, but his voice didn't have the same cocky swagger as before. "Actually, I can." I spoke calmly, evenly. "Company policy, section 7.3, personal research backups, and development documentation are the intellectual property of the employee who created them. I wrote that clause myself during the 2021 security overhaul." His eyebrows twitched. "You signed off on it," I added, "without reading it. Like always." Julian Marks had never been one for details, just appearances. For 12 years, I'd watched him nod through technical briefings like he was absorbing wisdom, then turn around and repeat my words in front of investors, sounding like a genius. His talent was pretending to know what he never understood. I was the one who created the algorithms that redefined predictive maintenance in smart infrastructure, built adaptive routing for emergency logistics, and developed models that saved municipal systems millions in efficiency costs. But the industry thought Julian had done it all. "Erin, let's talk this out," he said, rising slowly, trying to regain some footing. "Those algorithms were built during your time here, using company resources." "Using my mind," I interrupted, staring him down. "My training, my late nights, my personal learning bank. And as you may recall, the intellectual property agreement I signed made a clear distinction. Personal development documentation remains with the developer. I've been meticulous about that for over a decade. The truth? I'd been preparing for this moment for a year and a half. It started the night of the company's winter gala in early 2023. I overheard Julian bragging to the board chair about how he had built the firm's AI backbone, calling himself the architect of our most valuable systems. 10 feet away from me, he stood describing an algorithm I had spent 8 grueling months perfecting, while he couldn't even articulate the difference between feature extraction and dimensionality reduction. That night, I began archiving everything. Every email where I had to explain how machine learning actually worked. Every meeting where he asked me to dumb it down so he could repeat it in press interviews. Every code review that revealed his complete lack of understanding, and I wasn't worried about where I'd land next. "I've already accepted a position," I said. Julian's eyes narrowed. "Where?" "Chief Technology Officer at Solara Systems." His jaw tensed. Solara was our biggest competitor. They'd tried recruiting the mind behind the innovation for years. What Julian didn't know was that 6 months ago, I finally answered. Their head of engineering, Dr. Priya Vasquez, knew talent when she saw it. And now, I was walking out, with my name finally on the work I'd built. "You can't. There are non-compete clauses," Julian snapped, his voice regaining a hint of that smug confidence. "Which apply to you, not to me," I replied. "I was never placed on the executive registry, remember? I wasn't senior enough, at least on paper, to qualify for restrictive covenants. Another oversight in your contract management, Julian." I watched as his face tightened, eyes darting, trying to compute the implications. In his mind, I had always been the quiet analyst, a glorified assistant who just happened to code well. The idea that I could understand legal frameworks, negotiate job offers, or plan a career pivot without his permission? Unthinkable to him. "The problem isn't me leaving," I said softly. "The problem is you never learned what made you successful." Here's what he didn't realize. In 6 months, I'd be releasing a new wave of algorithmic solutions at Solara Systems that would make everything we'd built at Axion Tech look like training wheels. Not upgrades, entirely new frameworks, developed during off hours, built on architectures he couldn't begin to comprehend. These systems weren't just technically superior, they were transformative. They would redefine optimization across sectors. And once Solara started showcasing them, the industry would notice fast. And if you want to know what happened next, and trust me, you will, go ahead and subscribe. This isn't the end of the story. It's just the moment the light finally turned on. Technical publications would request white papers. Academics would analyze the math. Journalists would chase interviews. And Julian? He'd have nothing. No equations, no methodology, no insight. Just blank stares and recycled buzzwords. Meanwhile, Axion Tech's current models, my models, would slowly begin to decay without active refinement. The predictive protocols I built needed constant calibration, and without me, performance would slip. Clients would notice, the market would respond. But the best part? Julian had already committed to 4 major keynotes on next-gen optimization strategy. Over the next 8 months, he'd be standing in front of packed auditoriums, trying to explain innovations he didn't understand, answering questions he couldn't even parse. I had written every slide he ever presented, fed him answers through an earpiece when questions got too specific. Now, without me, he'd be exposed. "You don't understand what you're doing," he said, voice trembling now. "This will ruin your reputation. No one will trust you again if you steal company IP. I'm not stealing anything," I said flatly. "I'm taking my own work. And Dr. Vasquez already has patent attorneys reviewing my documentation. They seem curious." Julian blanched. "They're particularly interested in whether the patents filed under your name actually reflect the true inventor." And that's when the fear finally cracked through. That was the moment Julian's face turned ghost white. He looked down at the desk as if the weight of every lie he'd built his career on had suddenly landed there. 18 patents, each tied to multi-million-dollar licensing deals, were all filed under his name, listing me merely as a contributing researcher. Those patents were the crown jewels of Axion Tech's intellectual property portfolio. And I could prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that I had built them from the ground up. "The timestamp development logs are especially damning," I said quietly. "They show a precise evolution of thought, testing, debugging, breakthroughs, each correlating directly with every patent filing. And you know what they don't show?" Julian didn't answer. "They don't show a single contribution from you, other than signing off on the final version." He sank back into his chair. I could almost hear the mental gears grinding, trying to calculate the legal risk, the the corporate fallout. He knew what was at stake. If those patents were contested and overturned, Axion Tech could lose its licensing deals. Its valuation would nosedive, and his entire legacy would implode. Finally, he looked up. "What do you want?" "Nothing from you," I replied. "I'm just walking out with what's mine. But I thought you deserved a heads up on what's coming." I turned toward the door, lifting the modest cardboard box holding 12 years of brilliance and betrayal. 12 years of coding until midnight. 12 years of innovation passed off as someone else's work. Then I stopped at the threshold. "You know, Julian," I said, not turning around, "if you had given me credit, if you'd treated me like a collaborator instead of a ghost in your shadow, I would have stayed. We could have built the next era of optimization together." "Erin, wait!" But I was already walking down the hallway where I'd spent over a decade being invisible. Past the whiteboards that held my notes, the offices where I solved problems he couldn't pronounce. I stepped into the elevator and watched the floor numbers fall. 41, 40, 39. Then my phone buzzed. Text from Dr. Vasquez. "Legal finished the review. Patent attorneys want to meet next week. This is going to be bigger than we thought." For the first time in months, I smiled. Because what Julian didn't know was that the backup drives and the legal firestorm, that was just my opening move. In 3 weeks, Julian Marks was scheduled to keynote the Global Symposium on Machine Learning Systems. 3,000 industry experts, live-streamed, on record forever. And he'd have to do it. Without me, 3,000 of the world's top machine learning minds would be watching. The presentation topic? Next-generation optimization. Revolutionary approaches to complex problem solving. It would be broadcast live, archived online, and covered by every major tech outlet from Wired to MIT Review. And Julian Marks would have to deliver it. Alone. No talking points from me. No slides I had quietly crafted the night before. No live coaching through an earpiece. Just him, a spotlight, and an audience of experts expecting groundbreaking insight. On work he never even understood. As the elevator reached the lobby of Axion Tech's Market Street Tower, I stepped out. Not as the overlooked analyst I once was, but as someone who finally owned her voice, her name, her legacy. 3 weeks later, from my new office at Solara Systems, I watched Julian's empire start to buckle. Dr. Vasquez had given me a corner suite on the 38th floor with skyline views, a team of 12 engineers who actually wanted to learn, and a development budget triple anything I'd ever seen under Julian's leadership. But my favorite part? Watching his public persona unravel. Julian had always prided himself on being a visible visionary. He posted daily on professional networks, threads about innovation, leadership, and algorithmic insight. But without me supplying the substance, the tone changed. 3 days after my departure, he posted a vague quote about team synergy. A few days later, a recycled line about leveraging group genius. By the second week, he was reposting other people's articles with shallow captions like "interesting read." And the comments started shifting. Curious how this aligns with your previous optimization work, Julian? Would love your thoughts on how this implementation compares to your own model. He had no answers, no insight, just silence. Meanwhile, I was thriving. Dr. Vasquez introduced me to Solara's full engineering division as their new chief technology officer. When I walked them through the foundations of my new optimization frameworks, models built around dynamic constraint splitting and adaptive convergence patterns, the room went silent, not confused, awed. Chen Wei, our senior architect, finally spoke. "This is 5 years ahead of anything I've seen. How long have you been working on this?" 3 years. I told him. Nights and weekends. I was just waiting for the right place to do it justice. And now I had it. While Julian prepared to walk onto the most important stage of his life, completely exposed, I was just getting started. "Why didn't your previous company move forward with this level of innovation?" Chen Wei asked, leaning forward in his chair. I just smiled. Management wasn't technically sophisticated enough to see the potential. What I didn't say was that Julian Marks was too busy polishing his public image to notice the breakthroughs happening right under his nose. But the truly satisfying part wasn't just building the next generation of algorithms. It was watching him try to function without me. 2 weeks after I left Axion Tech, Julian was booked for a panel at the Bay Area Machine Learning Summit. I watched the live stream from my new office at Solera Systems, coffee in hand and curiosity peaked. The moderator opened with a simple question. What are some recent developments your team has made in adaptive optimization? Julian smiled and launched into a rehearsed answer about hybrid frameworks and dynamic feedback loops. It sounded impressive, if you didn't know the field. But when the follow-up came, can you walk us through a specific implementation example? He froze. 15 seconds of dead air. Then a vague line about iterative testing methodologies. The panelists exchanged glances. Dr. Amanda Riley from Stanford furrowed her brow. Julian, that's interesting, but could you describe the actual technical architecture behind those models? The math behind why they work? Another pause. Well, Amanda, I believe in making technical conversations more accessible to broader audiences. She raised an eyebrow. But this is a technical conference. The audience is full of engineers, not executives. He deflected again. Something about synergy and team collaboration, and that's when I saw the shift in her face. Curiosity gave way to confusion. Confusion turned to concern. By the end of the panel, Dr. Riley had all but taken over, fielding the real technical questions while Julian nodded blankly, tossing out buzzwords like scalability and cloud-aware logic without context. 3 days later, Tech Insider ran the headline, Has Julian Marks lost his edge? The article didn't outright accuse him of fraud. It didn't have to. It raised just enough questions to rattle investors and stir up whispers in every boardroom from Palo Alto to New York. But that wasn't the best part. The night before the Global Symposium on Machine Learning Systems, I was finishing a presentation draft when my phone rang. Unknown number. Erin, please, I need your help. Julian's voice, but stripped of all its bravado. He sounded hollow. How did you get this number? I asked. I called your old building. Your neighbor gave it to me. I know things ended badly, he rushed, but I'm in serious trouble. Tomorrow's keynote, I can't do it. I need the technical content, the slides, the talking points. I'll pay you, consulting fees, whatever you want. I leaned back, stunned, but not surprised. Just help me get through this presentation, Julian pleaded, his voice fraying at the edges. Julian, I said quietly, you've been presenting my work for 12 years. Surely you understand it well enough to explain it yourself? There was silence. Then, finally, the truth. You know I don't. You've always known that. And there it was, 12 years of unspoken deception, finally dragged into the light. The man who built an empire on my code, my models, my insight, admitting he'd never understood any of it. I'm sorry, I said, but I can't help you. I have my own responsibilities now. They're going to destroy me up there, he whispered. 3,000 people. It's being broadcast. It'll live online forever. Then maybe, I said, you shouldn't have spent 12 years pretending to be someone you're not. I ended the call. The next morning, I sat in the front row of the Global Symposium on Machine Learning Systems. The ballroom was filled with the brightest engineers and researchers from around the world. Dr. Vasquez sat to my right, our engineering team behind us. We were invited as special guests. Solera Systems was preparing to unveil its new platform in the coming months, and this event was the stage setter. Ladies and gentlemen, the moderator announced, please welcome Julian Marks, Chief Innovation Officer at Axion Tech, presenting next-generation optimization, revolutionary approaches to complex problem-solving. Julian stepped onto the stage, and even from 100 feet away, I could see it. His nerves, his discomfort. His movements were mechanical. His smile was tight, artificial. His eyes found mine in the front row, and I saw it. Desperation. The first 10 minutes were textbook Julian. Polished phrases about innovation, vague language about scalability, sweeping statements on algorithmic progress. His slides? Stock photos. Vague graphs. Bullet points that said nothing. But then came the first real question. Dr. Patricia Wong from MIT raised her hand. Julian, thank you for the overview. Can you walk us through the mathematical foundations of your optimization approach? Specifically, how do you handle multidimensional constraint satisfaction in dynamic environments? Julian blinked. That's an excellent question, Patricia. The mathematical foundations are quite complex. Yes, she said kindly. But could you share the actual framework? The algorithms? Computational complexity analysis? He faltered. Well, without getting too into the weeds? Julian, she interrupted gently. This is a technical conference. We're here to get into the weeds. I watched his face shift, confusion, then panic. He looked at me again, searching for some kind of lifeline, but I just sat still, expressionless, silent, and free. Gradient descent, genetic algorithms, neural networks, dynamic programming. Dr. Wong pressed gently. What's the actual approach behind your model? Julian's voice wavered. It's a hybrid methodology that combines multiple approaches. Which approaches specifically? She asked. That's when he cracked. I'm afraid the technical details are proprietary. I can't share the specific implementation without... Julian, interrupted Dr. James Okafor from Google. You're presenting at a technical conference. The entire point is to share technical methodology. We're not asking for your source code, he added. We're asking how the system works. Dr. Sarah Kim from Amazon stood as well. Frankly, some of the claims in your abstract seem mathematically impossible, she said calmly. You're suggesting optimizations that contradict known computational complexity principles? Beside me, I felt Dr. Vasquez stiffen. She leaned in and whispered, Did you write that abstract? I shook my head. That was all Julian, trying to sound impressive. And what happened next? Brutal and beautiful. Dr. Kim walked to the audience mic. Julian, she said, I've been following your published work for years. But I have to ask, do you actually understand the algorithms you're presenting as your innovations? The auditorium froze. 3,000 experts staring at Julian Marks under the spotlight. That's an inappropriate question, he stammered. Is it? Dr. Kim countered. Because I've reviewed your panel transcripts, your blog posts, and now this talk. There's a pattern of deflection. You consistently avoid technical specifics. Dr. Wong stood. Sarah has a point. Julian, could you explain why your model claims polynomial time solutions to NP-complete problems? I don't think this is the right forum to... This is exactly the right forum, said Dr. Okafor. You're making claims about revolutionary breakthroughs. We're asking how they work. Julian froze again, sweat visible under the stage lights. His gaze darted across the crowd until it landed on me. And then, something none of us saw coming. Dr. Vasquez stood up. I believe I can clarify, she said, her voice crisp and clear through the auditorium mic. All heads turned toward her. Julian paled. Dr. Vasquez? The moderator said, surprised. You're scheduled for this afternoon. I know, she replied, but I believe there's been a major misunderstanding about the source of these innovations. She looked directly at Julian, then to the audience. These optimization models weren't developed by Julian Marks or Axion Tech, she said. Gasps rippled through the crowd. They were developed by Dr. Erin Calloway, now Chief Technology Officer at Solara Systems. And just like that, the illusion shattered. Dr. Vasquez turned and gestured toward me. Suddenly, 3,000 pairs of eyes shifted from Julian to me. Erin, she said clearly, would you like to explain the mathematical foundations that Julian seems unable to discuss? I rose slowly, my heart pounding, but my mind razor sharp. Actually, I said, taking the microphone, I'd be happy to. I walked past Julian, who stood rooted to the stage like a man realizing he'd stepped off a cliff and only now understood gravity. The moderator handed me the mic, and I faced the sea of experts, engineers, researchers, professors, many of whom had unknowingly built on my work for over a decade. The optimization model Dr. Kim referenced, I began, achieves polynomial time behavior by restructuring the problem space rather than attempting to solve NP-complete problems directly. A murmur of interest swept the crowd. Instead of treating constraint satisfaction as a single, complex block, I continued, the model decomposes it into a network of localized optimization tasks. Each one is solvable independently, and then reintegrated using a convergence protocol I designed. That's the real breakthrough. Faces in the audience began to shift. Eyebrows raised, pens started scribbling. Dr. Wang asked about the mathematical backbone. I explained how I'd applied modified Lagrangian multipliers in tandem with adaptive gradient descent, but more importantly, how I reconceptualized the constraint space as a dynamic manifold. By applying differential geometry, I said, we can optimize the search path in a completely novel way. For the next 20 minutes, I laid it all out. Equations, logic trees, architectural trade-offs. No buzzwords. Just real applied mathematics. The questions that followed were complex, deep technical dives from minds I respected, and I answered every one with clarity and confidence. These were the conversations I had longed for. This was the recognition I had earned. When I finished, the auditorium erupted in applause. A standing ovation. 3,000 brilliant minds finally seeing the truth. Julian was still on stage, but now he looked small, forgotten. Dr. Kim stepped forward again. Erin, this is groundbreaking work. But one question. If you developed these models, why has Julian Marks been presenting them as his for over a decade? I looked straight at Julian, 10 feet away, but a world apart. That's a question you should ask him. Silence. We worked as a team, Julian stammered. Collaborative development? Julian, Dr. Okafor said, if it was truly collaborative, why couldn't you explain any of the technical methodology? Well, the implementation was handled by Erin, Dr. Vasquez finished, while you took credit. And that's when the journalists realized what was unfolding. Phones lifted. Live streams surged. Within minutes, Julian Marks exposed as fraud at Global Symposium was trending worldwide. But it wasn't over yet. Julian, Dr. Wang said softly but firmly, I think it's time for you to leave the stage. He didn't argue. He didn't protest. He just turned and walked off, shoulders slumped, face pale, completely undone. I never saw him again. 6 months later, I returned to the same conference stage. This time, not as someone forgotten in the front row, but as the keynote speaker. I stood before a packed auditorium to present a suite of truly revolutionary optimization models, frameworks I had developed alone, finally unveiled under my own name. Solera Systems had become the undisputed leader in optimization tech, and I was now recognized as the innovator I had always been. Meanwhile, Julian's career had completely unraveled. Axion Tech lost its largest contracts. Their stock value plunged. He was quietly removed from his position and disappeared from the tech spotlight. As for the patents, they were legally challenged, and I won. Development logs, documented iterations, internal communications. It was more than enough. I was officially recognized as the sole inventor of innovations worth millions in licensing revenue. But you know what the most unexpectedly satisfying part was? 3 weeks after the conference, I received a letter. Not a text, not an email. A handwritten letter in an envelope, delivered to my office at Solera. Erin, it began, I spent 12 years taking credit for your brilliance. I told myself I deserved it because I was the one brave enough to present it to the world. But I see now, presenting someone else's work isn't brave. It's cowardly. You were always the innovator, the solver, the mind behind everything we built. I was just the obstacle. He was right. And that, finally, is my story. From invisible senior analyst to chief technology officer, from watching someone else get credit for my work, to standing in front of the world, reclaiming it in full. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about becoming who you were always meant to be. So if this story lit a fire inside you, if it reminded you that your ideas matter, that your voice deserves to be heard, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below and tell me about a time when you had to fight for the credit you deserved. And don't forget to subscribe. I've got more stories, real, raw, and powerful, about people who refuse to stay invisible. Because the world is full of Julian Marks, but it's also full of people like us. And our moment is coming. Trust me. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or had your work passed off as someone else's, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me your story. Tell me about the time you stayed silent and what happened when you finally spoke up. I promise you, I'll read every word, because I know what it feels like to be invisible in a room you helped build. I know what it's like to hold back because someone told you that you were lucky to be in the room at all. And if you're still in that place right now, still waiting to be seen, I want you to know you're not alone. My story isn't just about revenge. It's about reclaiming what was mine and finally standing in a space that reflected my value. The truth is, no one will hand you credit. No one will protect your name, your work, your contributions, unless you do. Document everything. Advocate for yourself. Say the hard thing in the hard moment. And when the time comes to walk away, do it with dignity, preparation, and your power intact. So if this inspired you, even a little, share it with someone you believe in. Someone brilliant who's still hiding their light. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button. I've got more stories coming. Stories of people who rose, even when the system tried to bury them. Because maybe you're not just watching this story. Maybe you're getting ready to write your own. And when you do, I'll be here, cheering you on.